1862 Jalisco, the man who challenged his rebellious Creole until he paid for all his wickedness under the red skies of Jalisco in 1862. The echoes of a civil war mingled with the whispers of the hot lowlands. The haciendas smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and fresh blood. Among the sugarcane fields, the wind carried a promise, a reckoning that had taken far too long. They say that every soul that dares to defy power ends up marked. But what happened at Mr. Montiel's hacienda was something neither the living nor the dead could forget. The people called him the man who thought he owned the sun, because no dawn broke without his permission. No one breathed, no one loved, no one cried without his knowledge. Under his gaze, the workers bowed until their backs broke. And among them, a young man of Creole blood, with hard, rebellious eyes, began to murmur the unthinkable, that the man could be defeated. That night, under the dim glow of the oil lamps, the air grew thicker, almost unbreathable. The roosters didn't crow, the dogs didn't bark. Something in the darkness seemed to watch their every move. Montiel drank his favorite wine while he listened in the distance to the murmur of the day laborers, swearing loyalty. But one of them didn't lower his head. One, and only one, had decided to break the silence that had bound him since childhood. No one saw it coming. No one heard the first word of defiance, nor the echo of the first blow. Only later, when dawn brought the scent of smoke, did the town understand that something terrible had begun. The land, once docile and fertile, became a silent witness to a confrontation that no book dared to record. For what Montiel and his rebel did that night was more than an act of hatred. It was a pact with darkness itself. And some say that ever since, the Creole soul still wanders the fields, paying for every evil he committed, for every tear he shed. But there's a part of the story that was never told, something that was discovered decades later, hidden among the charred ruins of the hacienda. A diary, a notebook with blackened covers, where someone, perhaps Montiel, perhaps his enemy, wrote their last words before disappearing. What was on those pages would forever change what was thought to be known about that confrontation. And believe me, nobody was prepared for what they found. Before this story comes to an end, there is something that only those who stay until the very last second will discover. A detail that is not in any record nor in any official chronicle. A secret buried with them, and which today, for the first time, will be revealed. So take a deep breath, close your eyes, Imagine the sound of the wind rattling the adobe walls, the footsteps approaching from the hallway, and the voice whispering from the darkness. I didn't kill him. He forced me to. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a forbidden testimony, a cursed confession, and in the end, you'll understand why some names should never be spoken aloud, especially when night falls on Jalisco. Don Esteban Montiel was a man molded by power. From a young age, he had inherited the largest landholdings in Jalisco, along with an unwavering conviction that men were divided between those born to rule and those destined to obey. His face, weathered by the sun and hardened by contempt, had become an emblem of fear throughout the region. Families spoke his name in hushed tones, as if afraid to invoke his presence. But behind his authority lay something darker than ambition, a constant need for control, to see others submit to his will. Among the workers on his estate was one who never fully bowed. His name was Tomas Rivas, son of a former Creole foreman who had been betrayed and executed by Montiel years before. No one knew why Don Esteban had accepted him among his workers, but rumors said it was an act of cruelty. Having the son of his enemy working under his command, reminding him every day who held the power. Tomas, however, did not forget. Every blow, every humiliation his mother had endured after his father's death burned in his chest like an unquenchable fire. His hands, hardened by the earth, concealed a silent rage, and his dark eyes held a promise that one day Mr. Montiel would feel the same pain he had felt. There were nights when Tomas would gaze at the big house from the fields, the stars reflected in his eyes. From there, he could see Montiel's silhouette peering out of his study window, always watchful, always alone. And although the boss had everything, wealth, respect, power, what he lacked was rest. Not a single day without the fear of betrayal. The town knew it. When Montiel slept, his soul remained awake. It was said that he heard footsteps in the empty hallways, muffled laughter behind the walls, and that once, looking in the mirror, he saw a face that wasn't his own, a face that stared at him with hatred. Tomas heard things too, ancient voices, as if the dead were speaking to him from the ground. Sometimes, in the silence of the countryside, he swore he heard his father's murmur telling him to wait, that the moment would come. That invisible connection kept him strong, even when the chains of fear weighed heavily on everyone else. But it wasn't all darkness. There was a woman, Clara, the daughter of a cook, who saw in Tomas something more than resentment. She admired him for his quiet strength, for his ability to look the Lord in the eye without trembling. In the few moments they shared, amidst the dimness of the stables or the shadows of dawn, Clara whispered words to him that made him believe, for an instant, that something good still existed in that hell. Tomas listened to her, but didn't answer. Inside him, hope and hatred mingled like two poisons that couldn't be separated. Clara begged him to leave, to escape together before misfortune befell them, but Tomas had already chosen his fate. He didn't want to flee. He wanted justice. Meanwhile, Montiel watched from his balcony. He saw the weary faces of the day laborers, heard the growing rumors of insurrection among them, and smiled disdainfully. He thought he knew the soul of every one of his men, and he was convinced that none of them would have the courage to confront him. None, except one. That invisible bond between master and servant, forged from hatred, fear, and destiny, was about to shatter. For when a man has lost everything but the thirst for revenge, neither the highest walls nor the cruelest orders can hold back what is to come. The year was 1862, and Mexico was ablaze with wars, rebellions, and dreams of independence that never seemed to be fully realized. Jalisco, with its mountains and sugarcane fields bathed in relentless sunlight, had become a refuge for men who believed they could escape the political chaos. But in reality, beneath that apparent rural calm simmered a tension older than any war, that of the powerful against the dispossessed, the Creoles against the mestizos, the free men against those still shackled by debt or fear. On the outskirts of the town of Sayula stood the Montiel Hacienda, a fortress of stone and wood that dominated the valleys, as if watching over every life that breathed around it. It was an immense, silent structure, where the walls seemed to absorb the laments of entire generations. Iron bells marked the beginning and end of the workday, and the crack of the whip mingled with the crowing of roosters. Don Esteban Montiel ruled that place like a viceroy lost in his own empire. No one entered or left without his permission. It was said that hidden passageways existed beneath the hacienda, built decades before during the indigenous uprisings, where the owners hid their gold, and sometimes their sins. Some laborers swore they had heard moans coming from the ground, as if the souls of the former slaves were still trapped beneath the flagstones of the courtyard. Others claimed to have seen lights moving among the sugarcane fields at night, cold flashes that were neither fire nor moonlight. The air was thick with superstition. Every dawn, the women of the village left crosses of dry branches along the paths, as if to protect themselves from something they couldn't name. The old folks told stories of shadows that walked without bodies, of figures that peered through the windows of the hacienda when everyone was asleep. And although no one said it aloud, Everyone knew that since Tomás Rivas's arrival, things had begun to change. The work grew heavier, the animals restless for no reason, and Montiel's gaze seemed darker than ever. The nights grew longer. The wind, which once carried the scent of sugarcane and damp earth, now carried a metallic aroma like blood or rusted iron. In the stables, the laborers whispered that the Lord had made a pact with death to maintain his power, and that the price would soon be collected. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the hills, a slight tremor ran through the hacienda. The walls creaked, the lamps went out, and for a moment everyone felt a silence so profound that even the air seemed to stand still. It was then that Tomás, from the fields, thought he heard a voice that didn't belong to any living man, a low whisper like the echo of a forgotten promise. "Everything comes at a price, son. Everything comes at a price." From that night on, nothing was ever the same. The hacienda began to breathe with a life of its own. Mirrors fogged up for no reason, doors closed by themselves, and a constant murmur filled the empty corridors. Montiel summoned a priest from Guadalajara to bless the place, but upon his arrival, the priest refused to cross the threshold. He said there was something there, something not of this world. Meanwhile, the townspeople watched from a distance, with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some claimed to see figures among the trees, others spoke of shadows leaning by the well. No one dared approach after nightfall. And yet every day the day laborers continued to appear at dawn, as if an invisible force were drawing them back. Amidst all the mystery and superstition, a truth lay hidden. The estate held secrets that no man should uncover, and one of them, the darkest, was about to be unearthed by the only one who dared to defy Mr. Montiel. The first sign that something was wrong appeared one morning when the foreman found strange marks on the stable floor. They were deep lines, as if someone had dragged a heavy tool during the night. But what was most unsettling was their shape, an imperfect circle with symbols carved inside, made with a precision that no illiterate worker could have achieved. When Montiel found out, he ordered that no one speak of it. "Peasant superstitions," he said disdainfully, though his gaze betrayed a disquiet he couldn't hide. Tomás was one of the first to notice that the markings were recurring. He saw them near the old well, behind the sugarcane fields, and one night, even in the backyard of the big house. The farmhands began to murmur that it was a bad omen. They said the dead were demanding something, that the forgotten souls of the past had awakened. But Tomás, silently, suspected that it had a more human than spiritual origin. One early morning, while everyone else slept, he decided to investigate. He walked barefoot along the dirt path, carrying an old flashlight. The air was thick, filled with a sour smell that didn't come from the animals. When he reached the stable, he saw the markings again, but now they were fresh, as if someone had made them just minutes before. He knelt down and ran his fingers over the furrow in the ground. It was damp, blood. His heart raced. He turned off the flashlight and listened. Nothing, only silence, broken by the creaking of old wood. But then, from the darkness, a distinct sound emerged, a sharp metallic clang, followed by a long, almost human sigh. Tomás froze, his muscles tense, and in that instant he thought he saw something move behind the wall. A shadow. He backed away slowly, but the ground gave way beneath his feet. A loose slab shifted, revealing a narrow opening, like the entrance to a tunnel. Inside, an icy breeze brushed against his face. Tomás peered cautiously. The darkness was absolute, but he could make out something a few feet away. A burnt-out candle, scraps of cloth, and what appeared to be a dusty notebook. He picked it up with trembling hands. On the cover, barely legible, he could make out some initials engraved with a sharp object. E. M. Esteban Montiel. Upon opening it, the first few pages were blank, but further inside appeared words written in smudged ink, almost erased by dampness. "If anyone finds this, know that it's not my fault. There's something under this house that doesn't sleep." Tomas slammed his notebook shut, his pulse racing. The wind blew fiercely from the tunnel, stirring up dust and ash. He felt someone watching him, but when he turned around, there was no one there. Only the echo of silence, so profound it seemed to emanate from the earth itself. At dawn, he returned to the fields, feigning normalcy, but something kept echoing in his mind. If Montiel knew what was hidden beneath the hacienda, why did he never stop him? Or was it he who woke him up? That question would haunt him from then on, because, although he tried to ignore it, the notebook called to him. Every night he heard a faint whisper coming from where he had hidden it, as if the written words wanted to be read aloud. And deep in his instinct, Tomas understood that this was only the beginning. Behind those marks, that blood, and those voices lay a mystery that no man should unearth. But it was too late. The secret had been revealed, and what it had awakened would never sleep again. With the discovery of the notebook, something changed within Tomas. He was no longer just the son of the dead foreman, nor the silent laborer who endured the boss's abuses. He was a man who had touched the rotten heart of the hacienda, and now knew a fragment of its truth. However, that knowledge became his downfall. From that morning on, Montiel began to look at him differently, as if he sensed that something had been violated, as if he felt that someone had crossed the line between fear and rebellion. The days grew more tense. The sun seemed heavier, the hours longer. Montiel vented his frustration on the workers, punishing even the slightest mistake. He humiliated Tomas in front of everyone, forced him to clean the stables alone, and watched him from afar with that thin, cruel smile that foretold trouble. But Tomas didn't lower his head. In his silence, there was something new, a firmness that the boss didn't understand and that enraged him even more. One afternoon, Montiel summoned him. In his office, surrounded by family portraits and dusty books, he observed him for a long time before speaking. "Your father had that look too," he said gravely. "And look where he ended up." Tomas didn't answer, but the fire in his eyes was enough for Montiel to stand up, slap him and whisper, "Don't forget who's in charge here." That afternoon, the foreman was found dead by the well. They said it was an accident, but no one believed it. Clara wept silently, and Tomas felt his last glimmer of peace sever forever. Rumors spread. Some claimed to have seen the boss leaving the place minutes before, others that they heard muffled cries carried on the wind. No one dared speak aloud, because on that ranch, the truth was also punished. The notebook continued to haunt Tomas's mind. Every night he secretly opened it, trying to decipher the ink-stained phrases. Between confessions and delusions, Montiel wrote about a pact made in the early years of his fortune. He spoke of men who had been buried alive during the construction of the foundations, a sacrifice necessary to ensure the hacienda's prosperity. "They hold up my walls, and they demand what I promised." Tomas's rage mingled with horror. He understood that his father hadn't just been a victim of the boss's hatred, but an offering. The final sacrifice in a chain of injustices. From then on, every blow, every order, every tear he saw shed reminded him that Montiel's evil wasn't merely human. It was something older, fueled by the blood and fear of all who worked there. But Tomas could no longer flee. He knew that if he escaped, the boss's shadow would follow him to the end of his days, so he decided to stay, waiting for the right moment. He began to sow doubt among the day laborers, telling them fragments of what he had read. He spoke of the tunnels, the dead, the broken promises. And although fear paralyzed them, it also ignited something in their hearts, the desire to see the boss fall. Clara begged him, "Please don't go on. This isn't justice, it's condemnation." But he only replied, "We were condemned from the moment we were born here." Montiel's injustices had become law, his cruelty customary, and in that hell, where the living obeyed out of fear and the dead seemed to whisper from the ground, Tomas understood that it wasn't enough to defy the Lord. He had to be destroyed, even if, to do so, he also had to confront what Montiel had awakened beneath the earth. The night everything changed began with an almost too perfect silence. There were no crickets, no wind, not even the rustling of the trees. It was as if the estate held its breath. Tomas had decided to act. With his notebook in one hand and a torch in the other, he slipped away toward the tunnel he had discovered days before. Each step he took echoed off the walls, as if he were walking inside a living heart. A few meters away, he found something new. The candles that had been burned out were now alight, lined up one after the other, as if someone had passed by before him. The flame was weak, but enough to reveal something engraved on the wall, a phrase written in crooked letters, in Montiel's same handwriting. "Not all the dead sleep the same." The air grew colder. Tomas moved forward slowly, noticing that the symbols he had seen on the stable floor were also there, carved in stone. But now he understood their pattern. They formed a circle around an old wooden door, reinforced with rusty nails and sealed with chains. The notebook spoke of a forbidden room, a place where the remains of those who had been sacrificed were kept. Tomas felt his pulse quicken. He had to see it. He struck the chain with a stone until it broke, and upon opening the door, an unbearable stench enveloped him. Inside, there were antique objects, rusted tools, ruined portraits, broken crosses. But what disturbed him most was a wooden table covered with black cloths, and upon it a human figure wrapped in linen. It resembled a body, or what remained of one. When he pulled back the cloth, terror paralyzed him. It wasn't a recent corpse. It was the skeleton of a man with a medallion around his neck. Engraved on the medallion was a name, Santiago Rivas, Tomas's father. His throat closed. He fell to his knees, unable to breathe. The notebook spoke of sacrifices, but seeing it there before him was a wound that pierced his soul. Yet something else caught his eye. A second, thicker chain, fixed to the ground, connected to the skeleton as if it were still being held prisoner. And just below it, another inscription carved into the stone. One for every promise, one for every betrayal. Tomas stepped back, horrified. But before leaving, he noticed something impossible. The medallion began to move, not from the wind. There was no wind, but from something vibrating from the ground, a distant, deep breath, as if something enormous were awakening beneath his feet. He ran out of the tunnel, his heart pounding. When he reached the surface, the sky was covered with dark clouds, and on the balcony of the hacienda, Montiel was watching him. He didn't seem surprised. He was smiling. "You saw it, right?" he said in a deep voice, barely audible over the wind. Tomas did not answer. "Your father didn't die by my hands, boy. He chose his own destiny." That phrase hit him harder than any whip. What did it mean? Why was Montiel speaking as if his father had been part of the pact? Tomas looked at the notebook again. On the last page, a freshly written sentence in fresh ink. "The Son will complete what the Father began." Horror mingled with confusion. Who had written that? Montiel or someone else? That night, Tomas understood that the enemy was not just the Lord. It was the same force that had devoured his family, the one that now called to him from the depths of the earth. And although she tried to resist it, she could already feel it inside her. The same evil that once possessed Montiel had now found its new heir. From that night on, Tomas was never the same. He slept little, and when he did, he woke up drenched in sweat, with the echo of a breath that wasn't his own. During the day, his classmates looked at him with fear. His voice had changed, deeper, slower, and his gaze, once so fiery, now seemed empty, as if he were observing something the others couldn't see. Clara tried to approach him, but he pushed her away with a coldness that tore her apart inside. "Don't come near me," he told her once. "There's something here with me that won't leave me alone." The notebook had begun to transform as well. The pages, once stained and blurry, now appeared filled with new phrases written each night. No one knew who was doing it. Tomas swore he hadn't touched the pen, but at dawn he found different messages. "Don't resist. The debt is not yet paid. Blood calls to blood." As the days passed, the ranch seemed to sink into a palpable darkness. Animals died for no reason, the wells dried up, and a stench of decay permeated the air. Montiel, far from being afraid, seemed increasingly serene. He walked among the workers with a sickly calm, as if he knew that something inevitable was about to happen. "Every cycle must end," he would repeat. "And you, boy, were chosen to do it." One afternoon, Tomas confronted him. The boss was in his office, the windows open, a pale light bathing his desk. "What does this mean?" Tomas shouted, throwing the notebook onto the table. Montiel watched him with a slow, cruel smile. "Your father thought he could break the pact," he said, "but no one breaks an oath made in blood." Tomas grabbed him by the neck. For a moment he thought of killing him right there, but then he saw him. Montiel's pupils dilated, turning red as coals, and a voice, not human, spoke through him. "He belongs to us, just like you." The young man recoiled in horror. Montiel fell to the floor, gasping for breath, as a dark, thick shadow seemed to detach itself from his body and crawl toward the wall. Tomas ran out of the room, his heart pounding. That night, the sky opened up over Jalisco, and a storm lashed the hacienda. Lightning illuminated the fields, revealing figures moving among the sugarcane, human silhouettes, but faceless. Clara ran to the main house looking for Tomas, but she found him in the tunnel, kneeling before the stone door, his notebook open on the floor and his hands covered in blood. "Tomas," she whispered, trembling. "What are you doing?" He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "It's not me," he murmured. "It's him. He wants to go out." The earth began to tremble. From the depths of the tunnel came a guttural sound, like the wail of hundreds of intertwined voices. Clara backed away, screaming, as the candles went out one by one. Tomas fell to the ground, writhing as the notebook opened by itself, its pages violently turning. On the last page, a phrase was etched in burning letters. "The son will betray what the father denied." Suddenly, the storm stopped. Everything fell silent. Clara fled outside without looking back, while the hacienda seemed to breathe, alive, cursed. Deep in the tunnel, Tomas slowly got up. He was no longer crying. His face was calm, but his voice, when he spoke, was not his own. "Father, the debt will be paid." The wind blew fiercely, and the gates of the hacienda slammed shut with a crash that echoed throughout the valley. From the village, some swore they saw a reddish glow rise from the ground that night, and those who dared to approach afterward found only the notebook open on the stone altar, with a new inscription that chilled everyone's blood. "The blood of the Rivas will set us all free." As dawn broke, the Jalisco Valley awoke in a deceptive calm. The air smelled of damp earth and ash. The Rivas hacienda still stood, but its silhouette seemed older, more twisted, as if it had survived centuries of curses in a single night. The villagers kept their distance, murmuring prayers and closing their windows before nightfall. Clara, however, could not remain silent. Heartbroken, she decided to return to discover what had really happened to Tomas. As she crossed through the rusted gates, she noticed that the family portraits on the walls had been altered. The eyes of her ancestors seemed to follow her. In one of the paintings, the face of Don Rivas, Montiel's grandfather, was cracked, and behind the canvas was a symbol carved into the wood, a circle with 3 crossed lines identical to the one that appeared on the pages of the cursed notebook. Clara ventured into the library, where she found old notarial records, letters, and a map of the hacienda's lands. It was then that everything began to make sense. Decades ago, the Rivas family had made their fortune buying souls, not just land. They promised freedom to slaves and desperate peasants in exchange for an oath of perpetual blood. Those who died under their command were buried with a seal identical to the symbol. Montiel was not just an heir, but the last guardian of a pact that bound the spirits to the lineage. Among the documents, Clara found a yellowed parchment with faded ink. On it, Tomas's father had signed his name alongside Montiel's and Don Rivas's. The text read, "We offer our lives and those of our children to keep the land fertile and the shadow at bay." A sacrifice, a pact between generations. Clara then understood that Tomas's father had tried to break the oath, but had failed. His death was the punishment. Tomas, unknowingly, had inherited the burden and the role of successor. What he believed to be an act of justice against Montiel was, in reality, the final trap to fulfill the oath his own lineage had sealed. As she examined the papers, she heard a murmur behind her. She turned sharply and saw a familiar shadow. It was Esteban, the former foreman, the man everyone thought was dead. His skin was pale and his eyes were sunken, but he spoke with a human voice. "You shouldn't have come back, Clara," he told her. "He's not finished yet." "Who? Tomas?" she asked, her throat dry. "No, the one who speaks through him," Esteban replied. "The Lord of Silence, an ancient spirit that the Rivas family fed with every sacrificed soul. Tomas isn't fighting Montiel, he's fighting something much older." Then Esteban revealed to him that the tunnel beneath the hacienda was not merely a refuge or a passageway, but a temple. Rituals were performed there, always under the guise of justice or punishment. The names of the victims were written in the notebook, and each death nourished the entity. The book was not simply a curse, but the physical embodiment of the pact. Clara understood that if the notebook continued writing on its own, the cycle wasn't over. If she wanted to free Tomas, she had to destroy it, but Esteban stopped her. "You can't burn what's made of shadows. You can only break the pact where it was sealed." The wind blew, stirring up dust and echoes of voices from the past. Clara turned to the window and saw the sugarcane field bathed in an orange sun. In the distance, a figure walked slowly toward the tunnel. She recognized Tomas's silhouette, notebook in one hand and shovel in the other. At that moment, Clara understood that what was about to happen was not just a struggle between good and evil, but the fulfillment of an ancient oath sealed with generations of blood, and that the fate of Tomas and of all the Rivas depended on one final act, deciding whether to break the cycle or become forever part of it. The night was pitch black, and the hacienda seemed to hold its breath. Clara walked through the tunnel beside Tomas, each footstep echoing off the stone walls like a deafening heartbeat. The notebook rested in Tomas's hand, open to a page that glowed with ink that seemed alive, pulsing with a faint, reddish light. Each written word seemed to whisper, calling to them, guiding them toward the center of the circle of symbols etched into the floor. "This is it," said Tomas, his voice deep and firm, though his hands were trembling. "This is the place where it all began." Clara looked around. The tunnel walls narrowed into a small, circular enclosure covered in dust and the remnants of ancient rituals. In the center, a black stone jutted out of the ground, bearing symbols identical to those in the notebook. It was clear that this stone had witnessed generations of pacts and sacrifices. A feeling of oppression enveloped them, as if the very air were heavy with centuries of injustice and evil. Tomas placed the notebook on the stone. The words began to move, like ink snakes, rearranging themselves to form a message neither of them fully understood. The cycle closes when blood recognizes the truth. Only the air can decide. Suddenly, an icy wind swept through the room. Shadows lengthened and blended with the walls, forming faceless human figures that seemed to float around them. Tomas felt his body being pulled backward, but Clara held him, reminding him that they couldn't run away now. "It's not just Montiel," Clara whispered. "It's everything his family built, all the sacrifices, all the dead. How can we stop him?" Tomas closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He remembered every injustice he had suffered, every tear he had seen his companions shed, his father's death, the fear in Clara's eyes. And he understood that the final revelation wasn't just about him or Montiel, but about the ancient pact that kept them all trapped in a cycle of suffering. He opened his eyes. Decisively, he placed both hands on the stone. A red light emerged from it, projecting onto the walls and the figures around them. The notebook began to levitate, slowly turning, its pages turning on their own until it stopped at the last inscription. "The Son will complete what the Father denied." Tomas understood the great truth in that instant. He must not destroy Montiel or the shadows. He must confront them and accept the inheritance, not to perpetuate evil, but to break the cycle from within. The blood of his lineage was linked to the stone, to the notebook, to every sacrificed soul. Only by acknowledging that connection could he free them. With a firm gesture, Tomas pronounced the words he had learned from the notebook. "I accept the debt, but I will not perpetuate it. No more suffering, no more injustice." A deafening scream echoed through the tunnel. Shadows began to writhe, and faceless figures slowly approached, filling the entire space. The stone vibrated violently and suddenly shattered into 1,000 fragments that flew toward the walls, releasing a blinding light. Tomas and Clara fell to the ground, covering their eyes. When the light faded, all was silent. The shadows had vanished. The oppression had subsided. Before them, atop the rubble of the stone, lay the open notebook, now blank, as if it had never held secrets or oaths. Tomas knelt, understanding that the cycle had finally been broken. His lineage was no longer doomed, and the estate, though old and worn, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if a millennia-old burden had been lifted. Montiel was there, but he was no longer the man everyone feared. His body lay motionless, his face relaxed, as if he had finally found rest. And in that instant, Tomas understood another truth that no one had told him. The real enemy had never been Montiel himself, but the pact he represented, the invisible chain of suffering that his own family had helped to create. Clara approached and hugged him. "Is it finished?" she asked, her voice trembling. Thomas nodded. "Yes," he said. "We've freed everyone." But just when it seemed that calm was returning, a final revelation struck them. On the cover of the notebook, now completely blank, appeared a single symbol, bright and red, identical to the one they had seen in the tunnels. It was a silent reminder that the story of the Rivas family and the Montiel ranch could never be forgotten. That the past always leaves its mark, and that every injustice, however terrible, can only end if someone dares to confront it. Tomas and Clara emerged from the tunnel at dawn. Sunlight bathed the fields, but something had changed forever. The hacienda seemed smaller, the trees less dark, and the air was thick with promise. The voices of the dead had finally been heard, and the ancient terror that had silenced Jalisco for generations had dissolved, leaving only the memory of a broken cycle, the profound revelation that even the darkest of curses could end with courage and truth. When Tomas and Clara emerged from the darkness of the tunnel, the Jalisco sun bathed the fields in a warm light, but the feeling that washed over them was not one of immediate joy. They had achieved something extraordinary, yes, but the price had been high. Generations of suffering, lives taken, and secrets that should never have existed. As they walked through the sugarcane, the wind carried invisible memories of those who had been sacrificed, and Tomas understood that victory did not erase the pain, it only acknowledged it. The hacienda, once a symbol of absolute power and fear, now seemed silent, almost humble. Every wall, every hallway, every door, and every stone seemed to tell a different story. Stories of injustice, humiliation, and resistance. Tomas understood that the true struggle had not been only against Montiel, but against centuries of oppression that had shaped his family and the entire region. The liberation of that tunnel did not signify the total liberation of Jalisco, but it was an act of symbolic justice, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the truth could emerge. Clara, with silent tears streaming down her face, paused to gaze at the fields where the farm laborers worked under the sun. Each face bore the story of those who had suffered in silence. "I never imagined all this," she murmured, "was so vast, so ancient." "Yes," Tomas replied, "the history of our land isn't written only in books. It's hidden beneath the earth, in the walls of the hacienda, in the scars of those who live each day in fear." Tomas thought of his father, Santiago Rivas, whose sacrifice had been the spark that broke the cycle. He understood that the actions of those who came before, though painful and misguided, had planted a seed of awareness, of memory, and that he, by confronting the family legacy, had become a guardian of that memory, someone capable of recognizing injustice and transforming it into something that could save future lives. As they walked back to the village, Tomas and Clara reflected on human nature. How ambition can corrupt, how fear can paralyze, and how hope, though fragile, always finds a way. Jalisco, with its mountains and valleys, would never be the same after what had happened. The memory of the sacrifices would remain, but so would the lesson, that justice can prevail even after centuries of evil, if someone has the courage to confront it. Upon arriving in the village, they observed that the inhabitants were cautiously resuming their activities, yet with a hint of freedom in their eyes. The stories that had remained hidden for generations could now be told, remembered, and understood. Tomas realized that the impact of that night was not limited to the hacienda. It would affect the entire community, teaching them that dark secrets can be confronted and that individual courage has the power to change collective history. Finally, as the sun began to set, Tomas and Clara stopped on a promontory overlooking the estate. The golden light illuminated the fields and the house, and for the first time since they began their journey, Tomas smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because, at least, they had achieved the most important thing, recognizing the truth, freeing those who had been silenced, and ensuring that the memory of those unjustly sacrificed would never be lost. The story of Jalisco, with all its shadows and secrets, would continue, but now with a clear lesson. The past, however dark, can be confronted, understood, and transformed into strength for those willing to listen and act. And that truth, more than any physical victory, would be Tomas Rivas's true legacy. If you've made it this far, it means you've shared every moment of this dark story with us, every secret buried beneath the soil of Jalisco, and every sacrifice that for generations no one dared to name. Now it's your turn to participate. We want to know your opinion, your interpretation of what happened at the Montiel Ranch and how Tomas's fate changed forever. Leave us a comment telling us what impacted you the most. Was it the revelation about the ancestral pact? Tomas's courage in the face of the terror that surrounded him? Or perhaps the connection between the living and the dead, between history and the memory of the forgotten. Share your thoughts and join the conversation with other curious minds who, like you, seek to unearth the darkest secrets of the past. If you feel this story deserves to be shared with more people, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you stories that blend history and mystery, real or nearly forgotten tales, with shocking twists and profound emotions that will make you question what you thought you knew about our past. And there's more. If you've made it this far, we have a little bonus exclusively for those who stay with us until the end. We'll soon be revealing a previously unpublished excerpt from Montiel's notebook, with details that have never been shared before, and only our subscribers will be able to see it first. So make sure you're subscribed, and don't miss the chance to see it before anyone else. Don't let this story go untold. Comment, share, and subscribe. With your support, we can continue to uncover the darkest secrets, hidden injustices, and mysteries that time tried to bury. Because every story has a witness. And now you too are part of this tale. As the sun dipped behind the hills of Jalisco, the Montiel hacienda remained silent, but with a different feeling. The walls no longer whispered with fear, nor did shadows creep through the corridors. Something had changed. Tomas and Clara, though exhausted, knew they had accomplished something greater than themselves, freeing souls trapped for generations and breaking a cycle of suffering that seemed eternal. However, in the history of Jalisco, as in all histories marked by ambition and injustice, every ending brings with it a new beginning. The memory of the sacrifices will endure, and with it the most important lesson: that truth and courage can defy even the darkest secrets. Tomas understood that his life would never be the same. He had inherited more than a legacy of terror. Now he bore the responsibility of preserving the memory of those who had been silenced and of ensuring that history would not repeat itself. Clara and he walked through the fields, watching as the golden light illuminated every corner, while the farm workers resumed their routine with an air of hope they hadn't felt before. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared, but the symbolic justice of that night gave them the strength to look ahead. Each step was a reminder that even in the darkest places, human courage can illuminate what seemed lost forever. But not every mystery had been solved. As they gathered the remains of the notebook and closed the tunnel door, a cold wind swept through the estate. A distant, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from the very stones. It was a reminder that history has multiple layers, secrets patiently waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to look beyond the obvious. And that's where we leave this story, for now. But don't worry, we'll soon bring you a new tale, just as dark, just as disturbing, and with secrets that have defied time and memory. Stories that reveal how injustice, fear, and ambition can transform lives and destinies, and how those who dare to confront the past can change it forever. If you stayed until the end, write in the comments, "I keep the memory," and become part of our community of guardians of forgotten stories. Each of you helps keep alive the memory of those who had no voice, those who were sacrificed or silenced by history. The Montiel estate falls silent once more, but the shadows of the past remain, waiting to be uncovered. And we will be here to bring them to light in a new mystery that we will soon share with you. Prepare yourself, because what is to come is even darker, deeper, and more shocking than anything you have heard before.